The Council of 12 Races had ruled the galactic arm for over 8,000 cycles. Their authority was considered absolute, a force field of law and custom that no species had ever successfully challenged. They were the arbiters of civilization, the keepers of the great peace, and they moved through the cosmos with the slow, arrogant certainty of gods who had forgotten they were ever anything else. To them, humanity was a new variable, a species just over 3 centuries into its interstellar existence, energetic and ambitious, but ultimately a minor player. A species to be managed, the incident occurred on Viridian, a neutral trade world known for its sprawling, cosmopolitan cities. It was a place where species from across the Council's influence mingled, conducted business, and observed the strict protocols of interstellar law. A human family, traders who ran a small but reputable cargo business, were there to finalize a contract. With them was their son, Elian, a quiet boy of 7 standard years, who was more fascinated by the bioluminescent flora in the city's hydroponic gardens than the political currents swirling around him. The altercation began with a dispute over a docking fee. A Vorth, a member of one of the Council's founding races, a species known for their rigid legalism and draconian enforcement of protocol, claimed the human freighter had violated a temporal slot. The human father, a patient man named Kale, argued the discrepancy was a clerical error on the port authority's end. It was a minor issue, the kind resolved with credits or arbitration. But the Vorth official, whose name was Jorkel, was not a mere bureaucrat. He was the nephew of a High Council member, a position that had instilled in him a sense of impunity that bordered on pathological. He saw the humans' insistence on fairness not as a request for correction, but as an insult to Vorth authority. The confrontation escalated from words in a docking bay to a formal complaint, lodged with the planetary judiciary, which was, of course, beholden to council law. The Vorth leveraged their influence. The hearing was a farce. The human family stood before a panel of 3 Vorth magistrates, their testimony dismissed as the emotional outbursts of a primitive species. When Kale's wife, Lena, produced data logs proving their innocence, Jorkel, present as a witness, grew enraged. He saw his public humiliation in the making out as the family was leaving the judicial spire, their case dismissed and their ship impounded pending a security review. Jorkel intercepted them. He was accompanied by 2 Vorth security automatons, hulking constructs of gleaming alloy designed for intimidation. The confrontation was swift. Jorkel, his pride wounded, demanded the humans publicly recant their slander. Kale refused, standing between his family and the official. In the ensuing scuffle, Jorkel issued a command to the automatons to subdue the hostile elements. What happened next was a matter of cold, dispassionate record. The automatons moved with machine efficiency. In the chaos, young Elian, who had been holding his mother's hand, was knocked from her grasp. A heavy, armored foot of one automaton, designed to restrain a full-grown adult, came down on the child's chest with a sickening final crack. The sound echoed off the spire's polished stone walls. The automaton stopped. Jorkel stared, his face a mask of momentary surprise, which quickly hardened into annoyance at the inconvenience. The Council's response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic indifference. It was classified as a regrettable incident. A report was filed. Jorkel was quietly reassigned to a remote outpost for a single cycle, a move framed as a promotion. The family's appeals were rooted through a labyrinth of committees where they withered and died. The official stance was that the human child's death was a tragic but unavoidable consequence of his parents' failure to comply with lawful orders. The Council offered no apology, no reparations, not even a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The message was clear to every species in the arm. The lives of non-council races held no weight against the pride of a founding member. Earth received the news not with the fiery speeches or declarations of war that the council's pundits had predicted, and which they were prepared to crush. They received it with silence. The human ambassador to the council, a woman named Anya Sharma, was recalled. The human embassy on the council's capital world, a place of gleaming towers and ancient power, was shuttered. All human commercial and diplomatic vessels were ordered to return to the Sol system. The council, after a brief moment of collective curiosity, shrugged. They saw it as a tantrum, a minor species, withdrawing from the galactic stage in a huff. They assumed sanctions or a trade war would follow. They prepared for economic retaliation, but the ships that arrived at the edge of council space were not trade vessels. They were not blockade runners. They were survey ships, silent and unassuming, that appeared at the outer reaches of a dozen star systems simultaneously. They launched no missiles, broadcast no ultimatums. They simply deployed a network of small, anonymous satellites into the gravitationally quiet Lagrange points of those systems. The Council's border patrols, complacent after millennia of unchallenged supremacy, logged the unknown contacts as natural micro-asteroid activity and moved on. For weeks, nothing happened. The silence from Earth grew from a curiosity to an oddity, then to an unsettling absence. The Council's intelligence networks, designed to track fleet movements and political alliances, had no data to process. Humanity had not mobilized for war. They had done something far more terrifying. They had gone to school. They had remembered a fundamental principle that the Council, in its age of energy weapons and political maneuvering, had long since forgotten. The universe is not made of laws and treaties. It is made of math, physics, and the cold, unbreakable chains of cause and effect. The survey ships were not scouting for military targets. They were taking measurements. They were mapping the precise gravitational dance of every planet, every moon, every asteroid in those dozen systems. They were creating a perfect, real-time model of each stellar cradle. The Council, in its arrogance, had never considered the possibility that a species would not try to challenge their fleet, but would instead challenge the very foundation of their existence. They were about to learn that when humanity does not react with anger, it is because they are already moving past it, toward a conclusion far more absolute. They were not preparing to fight the Council. They were preparing to prove, in a way that no law or treaty could ever counter, that the Council did not deserve to exist. The Council's first hint that something was profoundly wrong came not from a sensor alarm or a border skirmish, but from a university. On the Vorth homeworld, a team of astrophysicists was running a standard simulation of their star system's orbital mechanics, a routine check for long-term stability. Their results were nonsense. The numbers did not add up. The gravitational constants they had used for a century no longer predicted the motion of a small, outer moon with any accuracy. They blamed a software glitch dot within a standard week. The glitch had spread. Every major scientific institution across the Council's territory, from the meticulous Vorth to the mathematically gifted Xylos, began reporting similar anomalies. Planetary orbits were deviating from their predicted paths by margins that were small but measurable. A moon around a gas giant in a system on the edge of Council space was found to be 3 kilometers off its expected trajectory. It was a minuscule variance, insignificant to the daily lives of trillions, but to the scientists it was an impossibility. The laws of celestial mechanics did not simply shift, the anomalies grew. The deviation of that first moon became a kilometer, then 10. A planet in a heavily populated system began experiencing tidal anomalies, its oceans rising and falling at times that defied the pull of its own star and moons. Panic began as a low hum of anxiety in the scientific community before it percolated into the public consciousness. The Council's leadership, slow and ponderous, finally demanded answers. They convened an emergency session, their first in over 200 cycles. It was during this session that the human truth was revealed. There was no glitch. There was no natural phenomenon. The Council's communications network was flooded with a single, untraceable data packet. It contained no declaration of war, no list of demands. It was a set of equations, beautiful and terrifying in their elegant simplicity. A physics package that laid out, in meticulous detail, the fundamental principles of a gravitational field manipulation system. The message ended with a single line of text in the common trade language. You were given the chance to be neighbors. You chose to be tyrants. Now you will be ghosts. The Council's military, finally shaken from its complacency, scrambled to find the source. Their most advanced deep space arrays located the origin of the transmission, a network of small satellites in the outer reaches of their own systems. The very same micro-asteroids their patrols had dismissed weeks earlier. They sent ships to destroy them. They were too late. The satellites were inert, their purpose already fulfilled. They had been listening posts, but more importantly, they had been calibration nodes. For weeks, they had been whispering, sending infinitesimally small, precisely tuned gravitational waves into the heart of each targeted star system. They were not weapons. They were catalysts. The science was so far beyond the Council's understanding that their best minds could only grasp the terrifying outcome, not the method. Humanity had discovered a way to manipulate gravity, not with brute force, but with harmonic resonance. They had found the frequencies at which a star's own gravitational field vibrated, the subtle hum of its immense power, and they had learned to play a countertune. They had not built a fleet to destroy the Council's worlds. They had simply reached out and, with the lightest of touches, nudged them off their ancient paths. The first system to feel the full effect was Kellar, the fourth homeworld. It was a system of perfect clockwork precision, a point of pride for its inhabitants. Over the course of 3 days, that precision shattered. The primary agricultural moon, which provided 70% of the planet's food, began a slow, inexorable drift toward the gas giant it orbited. Tidal forces, magnified 1,000-fold, ripped the moon apart. The Council watched in horror as a world broke into 1 billion fragments, a new, beautiful, and deadly ring forming around the gas giant. On the homeworld below, the loss of the moon was not just an agricultural catastrophe. It was a psychological one. The Vorth's sense of order, their entire identity, built on control and predictability, crumbled with their moon. The other targeted systems followed. There were no planetary explosions, no dramatic fire from the sky. The erasure was a slow, methodical process of celestial mechanics. A planet's orbit would elongate, turning a temperate world into a frozen wasteland over a few months. Another would be nudged slightly closer to its star, its oceans boiling away. A gas giant's gravitational field, minutely adjusted, would fling its colony-laden moons out of the system entirely, sending them tumbling into interstellar space. The Council's fleets, the most powerful armada the galaxy had ever seen, were rendered obsolete. They could not fight a star. They could not blockade a gravitational wave. Their ships, designed for ship-to-ship combat, could only watch as the very foundations of their civilization were systematically dismantled. The psychological impact was even more devastating than the physical. The Council had built its legitimacy on the idea of unassailable, eternal power. Humanity had not just defeated them. They had proven them to be insignificant. The Council's grand laws, their ancient treaties, their mighty fleets, none of it mattered against a species that had learned to rewrite the gravity well of a star. Panic spread like a contagion. Riots erupted on the capital world as citizens realized their protectors were powerless. The Council's founding races, the Vorth, the Xylos, the Dorn, who had for millennia looked down on younger species as children, were suddenly confronted with a terrifying truth. They were the children now, and they had just learned that their tantrum had cost them everything. Earth watched in silence. There were no victory parades, no grand proclamations. The collective mood was one of grim, sorrowful finality. They had not wanted this. They had wanted to trade, to explore, to share the wonder of the cosmos with their interstellar neighbors. But the Council, in its arrogance, had taught them a lesson humanity had learned long ago on its own violent planet. The only way to make a bully stop is to ensure they can never bully anyone again. They had not erased the Council's memory. They were erasing their geography, their resources, their ability to project power. They were showing the galaxy that there are consequences for murder, consequences that no law, no fleet, no ancient lineage can shield you from. The Council was not being conquered. It was being unmade. In the corridors of the Council's capital station, a structure that had once hummed with the confident energy of galactic governance, the sound was now a low, frantic murmur. The 12 races were no longer unified. They were a collection of terrified factions, each scrambling to save itself from the slow, gravitational apocalypse that was consuming their territory. The High Council Chamber, a vast dome where the fate of 1,000 worlds had been decided, was now a war room of desperation. Holographic displays showed the inexorable spread of the orbital deviations, a map of their unraveling empire. The Vorth, the architects of the system, were the most shattered. Their home system was in chaos, their agricultural base destroyed, their people descending into a primal panic. They had gone from the undisputed masters of the arm to a species begging for survival in the span of a single month. Their representative on the council, a once proud official named Fallon, now spent his days arguing with the other races, trying to secure passage for refugee ships, only to be met with cold, self-serving politics. The other races, seeing the Vorth's fall, were already maneuvering. They were not trying to save the Council. They were trying to position themselves to be the ones humanity might spare. A secret emergency session was called, one that did not officially exist. It was convened by the Xylos, a race of renowned mathematicians and logicians, who had been the first to grasp the true scope of humanity's weapon. They understood that the gravitational manipulation was not random. It was precise, surgical. Humanity was not just breaking worlds. They were dismantling the Council's logistical and military infrastructure with cold mathematical efficiency. Every shipyard, every military depot, every communication hub in the targeted systems was being systematically isolated by the celestial chaos, their supply lines severed by shifting planets and unstable orbits. The Council's fleets were not destroyed, but they were stranded, unable to navigate the treacherous new gravitational landscapes of their own home systems. The secret session was a tribunal of desperation. The remaining 11 races turned on the Vorth. The Dorn ambassador, a reptilian species known for their pragmatism, laid out the brutal logic. "Your official," he hissed, his voice echoing in the dimly lit chamber, "murdered a human child. Your judiciary protected the murderer. Your council endorsed the act with its silence. This is your fault. You will surrender yourselves to human justice. You will deliver Jorkel and every official involved in the cover-up to Earth. Perhaps this will appease them." Fallon, the Vorth representative, stood rigid, his scaled face a mask of horror and fury. Surrender? To a species of primitives who are tearing apart the cosmos. You would have us grovel before the destroyers of our worlds? We would have you survive, the Xylos ambassador replied, her voice a calm, dispassionate counterpoint. Our calculations show that humanity's campaign is escalating. They are not just targeting your worlds now. They are moving to the systems of those who supported you, our worlds. If we do not offer a sacrifice to their justice, we will all be cast into the void. Your pride is not worth our existence. The debate raged for hours. Accusations were hurled. Ancient alliances were broken with bitter words. In the end, fear won. A motion was passed, the first and only time the council acted with such speed in its history. The Vorth were expelled. Their fleet was declared a rogue entity. Jorkel, who had been living in comfortable exile on a resort world, was arrested by a joint force of Xylos and Dorn commandos. He was taken not to the council's justice, but to a neutral station at the edge of human space, along with every magistrate and official who had been part of the cover-up. They were placed in a single, unarmed transport vessel, its communication array broadcasting a continuous loop of the council's formal apology and unconditional surrender to Earth. They awaited a human response. The response came, but not in any form they expected. The transport vessel was allowed to drift. No human ship came to claim the prisoners. No communication acknowledged their existence. They were simply ignored. At the same time, the gravitational anomalies ceased their expansion. The chaos did not reverse, but it stopped growing. The systems already affected were left to their slow, tragic fate, but the worlds that had not yet been touched were spared. The message was clear and far more chilling than any demand for surrender. Humanity did not want apologies. They did not want prisoners. They wanted the council to understand the weight of what they had done. The council had offered a scapegoat. Earth had demanded a reckoning. And in their silence, they forced the council to live with its own reflection. The races that had so readily thrown the Vorth to the wolves now had to look at themselves. They had prostituted their own laws, their own supposed morality, in a desperate attempt to save themselves. They had proven that their unity was a sham, their justice a tool for the powerful. Humanity had not just broken their worlds. They had broken their spirit. The council, as a concept, was dead. It continued to exist in name only, a hollow shell of committees and edicts that no one respected anymore. The remaining races began secret negotiations with each other, forming new, smaller alliances, preparing for a future where the old order was a cautionary tale whispered in terrified tones. And in the silence, a single human ship, a small, unarmed corvette, entered the debris field that had once been the Vorth agricultural moon. It did not fire upon the refugee ships or the crippled Vorth fleet. It simply broadcast a short-range repeating message on all frequencies. It was a child's voice, singing a soft, sad lullaby in an old human language. It was a memorial, a reminder of the single small life that had been deemed inconsequential by a power that was now dust and memory. It was not a threat. It was a eulogy. The council had not been defeated by a superior weapon. They had been undone by a superior conscience, one that valued a single child more than they valued their entire civilization. And that was a lesson the galaxy would not soon forget. In the aftermath, the galaxy did not return to normal. There was no new order to replace the old one, no single power rising to fill the vacuum left by the council's collapse. Instead, there was a slow, cautious realignment. 1,000 different species suddenly left to their own devices, forced to navigate a cosmos without a central authority. The former council races, stripped of their hubris and a significant portion of their territory, were diminished. Their great fleets were grounded, their economies in shambles, their populations scattered across refugee camps and damaged colonies. They were no longer the masters of the arm. They were just another group of survivors, trying to rebuild. And humanity? Humanity retreated, not out of fear or guilt, but out of a deliberate, calculated choice. The Sol system, which had been a bustling hub of interstellar trade, went quiet again. Human ships became a rare sight. Their colonies, few in number, became self-sufficient, closed systems. They had made their point. They had shown the galaxy what they were capable of. They had no desire to govern it, to police it, or to extract tribute from it. Their intervention had been an act of absolute, singular justice, not the first step in a campaign of conquest. They went home, leaving the other species to sort out the mess of the civilization they had shattered. This withdrawal was perhaps the most profound statement of all. It flew in the face of every political theory the Council had ever known. Empires expand. Victors conquer. Power is used to acquire more power. Humanity had done the opposite. They had used ultimate power to achieve a single, specific goal, the dismantling of a system that had sanctioned the murder of one of their children. And then they had set that power aside. To the rest of the galaxy, this was incomprehensible. They searched for the hidden motive, the long-term plan, the trap. They could not accept that a species would act with such finality and then simply stop. It was this inaction, more than the gravitational weapon, that instilled a deep, enduring awe. Humanity had not just proven they could destroy the Council. They had proven they had the discipline not to replace it. On the shattered remnants of the Vorth homeworld, the survivors were left with the most difficult task, understanding. Thalon, the former representative who had survived the political purge and now worked in a refugee distribution center, found himself haunted by a single recurring thought. He had voted for the original report that dismissed the human family's case. He had signed off on the regrettable incident classification. He had been part of the machine that valued Vorth pride over a child's life. Now, sifting through the dust of his ruined world, he understood the cost. One day, a human ship did return. It was not a warship or a survey vessel. It was a small, unmarked transport. It landed outside the main refugee camp, and a single human emerged. It was Kale, the father. He looked older, his face etched with a grief that had hardened into something resembling peace. He was met by a wary Vorth security detail, their weapons raised, but their hands shaking. Kale ignored them. He walked through the camp until he found Thalon, who was standing in front of a tent, frozen in recognition and terror. Kale did not speak for a long moment. He simply looked at the Vorth, at the hollowed-out eyes, the tattered clothes, the remnants of a once proud people. Then he reached into his coat and produced a small data wafer. He placed it on a crate between them. "This is the agricultural data from our own early terraforming projects," Kale said, his voice quiet and tired. "It will help you stabilize your remaining soil. It's not a solution, but it's a start." Thalon stared at the wafer, unable to comprehend. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "After everything, why?" Kale looked at him, and for a moment, Thalon saw not a victor, but a father who had lost his son. "Because Elian was a good boy," Kale said. "He loved to grow things. He would have wanted to help. Not you, not your council, but the farmers, the ones who had nothing to do with his death. He would have wanted them to have food." He paused, his gaze hardening slightly. "This is not forgiveness. I don't know if that exists for what was done. But it is a choice. The same choice your council was given and failed to make. The choice to be neighbors or to be nothing." He turned and walked back to his ship without another word. The Vorth guards parted for him, their weapons lowered. Thalon stood there, the data wafer in his hand, feeling its impossible weight. It was a gift from the species they had wronged, from the man whose child they had failed. It was a seed, both literal and metaphorical, offered to a starving people by the one they had starved. The Council's entire ideology had been built on the concept of strength through dominance. Humanity had just shown them a strength so profound it did not need to dominate. It could afford to be merciful. It could afford to rebuild the very people it had rightfully crushed. The lullaby from the human corvette that had sung over the debris field eventually faded from the galaxy's datanets. But the story did not. It became a foundational myth for the new age. It was told in the space stations of the former Dorn and in the mountain holds of the Xylos. It was a story of a quiet, unremarkable species that had been pushed too far. had reached out and unmade an empire with the fundamental forces of creation, and then, having made their point, had simply gone home, leaving behind not a single garrison, but a single, haunting question. The question echoed through the new alliances and tentative trade routes that slowly began to crisscross the arm. What kind of species wages total war, wins, and then offers the survivors agricultural data? What kind of power destroys without conquering, punishes without enslaving? It was a paradox that the old council's logic could never resolve. And it was that paradox that became the new order's guiding principle. Power, they learned, was not in the size of your fleet or the number of worlds you subjugated. Power was in the ability to hold back, to act with precision and finality, and then to stop. Power was in the quiet dignity of a man who, having lost everything, still chose to plant a seed in the ashes of his enemy's world. Earth remained a quiet star on the galactic map, its species a self-contained enigma. They had not become the galaxy's police or its saviors. They had simply become its conscience, a silent, unassailable fact of life. The lesson of the Council's fall was not one of fear, but of responsibility. For every species that rose to prominence in the centuries that followed, the story served as a warning. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake patience for a lack of resolve. And above all, remember that in a universe of cold, unfeeling laws, the one law that cannot be broken without consequence is the simple human truth that every life has value. And for those who forget that, who believe they are above it, there will be no war, no negotiation, no second chance. There will only be the slow, silent, inescapable hand of gravity, pulling their world apart, star by star, until they are nothing but a memory, a lesson whispered in the dark. A cautionary tale for an age that is still learning how to be civilized.